Powerful insights often occur when you least expect them. On Transformative Leadership Conversations, they're at the heart of every episode. Hi, I'm your host, Winnie Da Silva, and together we're exploring a spectrum of leadership themes through the compelling stories and insights of seasoned leaders and prominent experts. So in each episode, you'll walk away with inspiration, strategies, and tools to enhance your leadership skills, build effective teams, and lead thriving organizations. My guest today is Amy Shilliday. She's a learning experience designer, neurodiversity advocate, and founder of Shilliday Vaughan Consulting. So with over 25 years experience in corporate learning and development, Amy brings deep expertise in instructional design, adult learning, and team facilitation. What makes her work especially powerful is her focus on making learning more accessible for everyone, including the 1 in 5 adults who identify as neurodivergent. In her work with HR and learning and development teams, Amy helps organizations better understand and support neurodivergent employees, particularly those with ADHD. So her message is clear. When we design learning and divergent brains in mind, we make it better for actually everyone. Drawing from her personal journey as a parent, coach, and lifelong learner, Amy blends practical tools with thoughtful insights on how we can all do better in whatever leadership role we're in. Amy Shilliday, thank you so much for being on the show. I'm really excited to have you here. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, Winnie. This is exciting.
Yeah. So, could you just start out by talking a little bit about you, like who you are and what you do, just to kind of give us some context for our conversation today?
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you. Well, I've been in learning and development space for my oldest is 26, so a little over 26 years. Um, and I started off working in corporations, and I had begun way back when I started teaching. I taught second grade, and I have close contact with children with all kinds of developmental differences and learning disabilities and things like that. ADHD certainly one of those. And then when I moved into the adult learning space in corporate environments, I started encountering it more and more. Um, and interestingly enough, I come from a generation where a lot of people have these developmental differences, but we didn't disclose them. We didn't talk about them. Our parents kind of squelched them, so we learned some coping strategies. And when my sons were born, and as they were going through the school process, I recognized some of these patterns in my own children. And then I took those same patterns and I started to see them in my classrooms, in my adult learning classrooms. And what's interesting in the corporate space is you can't diagnose somebody. Like you can't say, "Oh, do you have this?" Or I think because HR, Um, so I have just been studying this closely for, good Lord, probably about 20 years of just focused and attention, and then working with my children, who two of them have it. You kind of develop some expertise by proxy, by working around that, listening to what their doctors tell you and what their psychiatrists tell you, and trying things on and seeing what works for them. Because at the end of the day, each job is different. So, but I have noticed some patterns and some things that can make a job easier for someone with ADHD to function, right? And not just cope.
Yeah. And I want to talk about this a little bit towards the end, but you have kind of a consulting business, Shilliday Vaughan, on helping learning and development and HR people help people kind of think through how can we serve and develop neurodivergent leaders and other employees, right?
Well, yes, because the reality is I had my main specialty is to focus in on those L&D teams, the HR teams that are part of the onboarding process, because there are some little tweaks that we can make in our instructional design that, yes, it feels like accommodations, if we want to use that word. I don't always love that word, but it feels like we're making concessions for the neurodivergent crowd. But the reality is, when we apply some of those strategies, it benefits the neurotypical learner as well.
Sure. And why do you say that? Yeah. So how?
Yeah, well, I mean, we talk about there's a concept called UDL, which is Universal Design for Learning, and I didn't come up with this. There's a wonderful think tank called cast.org. They came up with this framework, and it's about multiple representations of the content. So I'll give you an example. If the only way a learning program is presented to someone who's onboarding with a company is through a manual, and that manual is completely written, there's no pictures, there's no diagrams, no nothing. That's a singular method of delivery, and that doesn't land well with everybody.
Neurodivergent or not, right? Because I'm just thinking about just learning, like, what are your learning preferences, right? And there's not always reading, there's visual, there's audio, there's a whole bunch of others, right?
Yeah, and I'm reading is not 100% my I love to read for pleasure, but when I have to read for something, I need some supporting cast. I need some pictures, I need some audio, I need some I need to get in there and do things. So, what we do is we apply principles where we offer multiple means of representation of that content. So, you might have a body of text, you might have, a short micro learning video produced that describes what's in it. You can even have an audio recording of the text is just a separate representation. And sometimes, yes, even for someone who's neurotypical, which is 80% of the adult population, we don't wanna shut out that 20% because we're making it difficult for them, um, deliberately. And it's really easy. What I come in and consult with instructional design teams predominantly is they find it, "Oh, that's I thought we were gonna have to buy a new piece of software, a new tool," and the reality no, you don't, you just have to kind of reimagine what you're doing with the tools you already have. Now, for facilitators, sometimes there's a little bit of a learning curve. It's how to address it in the classroom, how to support it in the classroom, and unfortunately for a number of facilitators who come from the operational side of their business, they don't always have the education background chops to understand how to recognize it, what to do with it, how to support it. And that's where I can come in and help give them some best practices.
Got it. So, you threw out a statistic there, and I want to make sure I heard it right. Can you repeat it, and just so I heard it?
Yeah, about 20% of the adult population global, this isn't just unique to the United States, but it's global, um, has either been diagnosed with some neurodivergent profile or they self-identify. And there are some, and I know that sounds a little wishy-washy, but it really can't be. That there's obtaining an adult diagnosis is not as easy as it is to take an 8-year-old to your pediatrician and say, I think this might be going on. Pediatrician writes a recommendation and there you go, right?
Especially depending on the country, right? Like some countries, it's much harder to get a diagnosis, right?
Yes, and in sadly, and a lot of insurance companies don't cover the costs, for adult diagnoses, which, that's prohibitive. But I think there's enough information that's out there that's getting to be out there for adults to recognize some patterns and feel less isolated. So, whether they feel like they're ADHD, which is usually a diagnosis, or maybe they think they're on the spectrum and there's some things in there. We gotta be careful with that because there's phrases that I hear every once in a while, "Well, we're all a little ADHD." Don't ever say that to someone, you're right, because no, until you understand really how that brain operates, that's kind of insulting, it's a little condescending to say
And
that.
what's interesting about ADHD too, and potentially other neurodivergent, although not all, is that you can't really tell. You know what I mean? It's not something that it's like, "Oh my gosh, this person is definitely something," right? You just can't. I mean, sometimes maybe you might suspect it, but for other people, you would have no clue. So I think that's also, something to be really keep in mind for people.
It definitely is, and even for those who are adept in spotting it, they need to be very, very careful about what they say because, I mean, and sadly, even in today's culture where people are being more upfront with things like mental health and so forth, um, it's still not 100% fail proof, right? Like I was reading an HR blog post last week that was talking about someone asking, "Should I disclose I have ADHD? Should I disclose this in the interview?" And there was a lot of and my initial thought was, you disclose whatever you feel comfortable to disclose. I think um, I tend to look at ADHD and other neurodivergent patterns as superpowers.
Yeah, so I wanted to talk about that. Yeah, so let's zoom out, and I do wanna come back to that question about disclosure because I think that's a really interesting one.
Yeah. Well, and I think the sad thing is that in with some companies, you're talking, especially the first couple of rounds of interviews, you're not necessarily talking to the hiring manager yet. You're talking through a recruiter, a screener who's just checking qualifications. So, and the sad thing is if they're not equipped themselves to address and support one of those diagnoses when it's presented to them, they might write a note in a file, which they're not legally supposed to do, but
And who knows how that gets interpreted, and yeah, so before we get down that road, I kinda wanna ask, you just threw out there, that ADHD can be a superpower. And I think that there is sort of continuum of how people think about, ADHD and potentially, other neurodivergent like labels or whatever or diagnoses is kind of this continuum. It's like it's a mental health issue to it's a superpower to it's, this thing that gets in the way that I can't stand to, it's a really, thing that it undermines my ability to function or be my best. In your experience, how have you started to really think about it after these years of experience?
I thank you for that question because I think it varies from individual to individual, and I will say that a number of people who have ADHD, if they are in a role where the superpowers that they do have, like creative problem solving and innovation, are if they're in a role that those things are not encouraged, then for that individual, it can feel like a burden, like something that gets in the way of their success, right? Um, so sometimes it's a matter of coaching someone through, is this really the right fit for you? Because it doesn't have to be a deal breaker, right? I think I have worked with plenty of people who have ADHD who are in the learning and development space, and I think it's a perfect space for them. Do they encounter pockets where it's especially challenging? Yes. Do I help them enunciate that so that they can be successful? Absolutely, because I think coupled with that is a sense of uh, imposter syndrome. Oh, I can't. This is a challenge for me. Therefore, everything is a challenge for me. Right.
Yes. Which can happen to anyone, by the way. Right? That whole idea of like, I'm being challenged and it's just everything. Yeah. But maybe more so, right, with people who have ADHD. Yeah.
Well, I think from for the hiring manager standpoint, from the HR standpoint, from the learning director standpoint, having an appreciation for the fact that any neurodivergent trait, ADHD on the spectrum, any of them really, dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, anything, does not necessarily mean that it doesn't mean someone's broken. It just means their brain is wired to operate differently, right? It's kinda like looking at people and not people, but looking at their laptop and saying, "Are you working off of," like IT will ask, "Are you working on Windows or iOS?" Right? So I look at it kind of the same way. Like, are you operating on a neurotypical pattern or a neurodivergent pattern, right? And once you know, "Oh, okay, well, now this is what we're dealing with," you can look at that lens a little bit differently and say, "How can I help this person be successful accomplishing the same tasks?" Right?
Yeah. There's something that you said that I thought was really interesting because when I asked you about, how do people view being neurodivergent in terms of like, superpower versus mental health issue or whatever, and you immediately said it depends on the person, and I think that's really validating to say, like, wherever you're at, like, let's start there. Like, if you feel like if it's a mental health issue, let's start there and figure out how do we move you, right? Or if you feel like it's a superpower, how do we leverage that, right? Anyway, your answer to that was really interesting, and then this whole idea of a fit, where what do you need in order to, again, be your best? Like, what kinds of things do you need to bring that out? Which again could be applied to a lot of people, and again, not to, minimize, right? But it's almost like it's maybe not that different. Maybe where they are around, you know, uh, maybe extremes, or I don't know. How would you think about that in terms of like the difference between a neurotypical person where they just have different learning styles versus someone who has ADHD? Like how would you differentiate that?
I wouldn't differentiate it at all. I would just make sure that the person who has shared with me that they have ADHD, I wouldn't go out and say, I think this is what's going on, right? Um, Unless I really want to be in the HR office every afternoon, right? But I think I would talk to that person and say, okay, you don't get frustrated with yourself, right? Everybody learns at different paces. I always love to tell people, don't use someone else's yardstick to measure yourself, right? So just because this person is zooming ahead on this topic or this module, this section, and you're not there yet, doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. Because I promise you, when we get to a problem, or not to a problem, when we get to this situation where we're talking about practical application, the critical thinking piece of this, that's where ADHD, um, folks shine, right? Because they can look at that bigger picture and see how things fit together, and then come up with these creative ideas. If I've got someone who is just very, very methodic and task oriented and just really there's a structure to everything, they can they can be looking at something, trying to solve a problem and be stuck sitting there for hours. Whereas someone who has ADHD can breeze in, walk behind them, look over their shoulder and go, "Oh, have you tried this?" And it will solve world peace. Like, like, I never thought of that. It's a matter of thinking inside the box as opposed to thinking outside the box, in those cases. And more often than not, someone with ADHD is gonna have that extra ability to see and picture things outside the box. So, if you're a hiring manager and you see that capability, which is really where I would lean into it, is its capability for creative problem solving, I would think about how can I leverage this talent, right? If you want to maximize output for your team, how can I leverage this talent? So you put that person into your think take processes, right? If you're going to have brainstorming meetings, put this person in there because that's what you want, um, just to be able to leverage that skill.
Yeah, so if someone's listening right now who's a leader who either someone has disclosed to them, "I have ADHD and this is what that means," or someone who hasn't, but you've noticed certain things that either lead you to believe it or maybe not. Maybe just whatever it is that you feel like they're struggling with, maybe it's typically like, being able to focus or maybe really hyper focus, and it's like, how do I switch that person over or whatever they're noticing. What advice can you give a leader to make sure that their team members really, again, do their best work wherever they're
Yeah.
at?
That's a really good call, and I think there's some things that need to come in for that manager, that leader before they even have that conversation with that person, right? Because I think the more equipped a leader is to coach someone, and I mean truly coach. I don't mean sometimes call centers. Yeah, sometimes we'll say, "Oh, well, we're going to coach this individual," which is code for we're going to sit down with them and tell them everything they're doing wrong and that they need to fix it, and there's a deadline by which that's not coaching. That's intimidation. Sometimes it's effective, but that's not coaching. So when we talk about coaching, it's about asking those really good questions to open up dialogue, right? So if someone came to me and said, maybe if I'm a leader and I recognize someone on my team is struggling with something, if I'm going to sit down and have a one-on-one with this person, I'm going to ask questions designed to open that person up and share with me what they think might be going on, how they can solve this issue on their own without me making any recommendations. Now that takes some practice. I will tell people, if you talk to any of my colleagues, yeah, my favorite thing to say is I make a better mentor than I do a coach because coaching requires a lot of patience, right? I like to jump to solutioning.
Yeah, I know, right? It's really hard.
It's really hard. But if as a leader, if you ask someone, "Hey, I know that this we're not hitting this particular number. Is there anything that I can do to support you better? What do you think is going on here?" Get them to talk to you. And I think it's built on a foundation of trust, mutual trust, right? So there's a lot of layers that need to come into play before that leader can kind of you know, triage something in the middle of it happening, right? Because if they don't have that background information, if they don't have that trusting relationship with that person, they're not going to tell them anything. They're certainly not going to disclose any medical diagnosis or anything like that. So,
Yeah. So, Amy, can I ask you? Because I think I mean, you're bringing up a great point because I think coaching is a leadership skill that leaders should have anyway. So this is like one more reason to like be a really good coach. Do you have like, any like a toolkit or like, even like some questions that leaders could turn to be a really good coach, especially in the moment of trying to help someone who they might think be struggling with ADHD?
Yeah, I've got well, I'm building a toolkit for leaders to be able to ask those kind of coach-like questions, right? I do have a series of questions that are coach-like just for general circumstances, not always just focused on neurodivergence, but I'm certainly not ICF certified. I just want to fully disclose that, um but yes, I agree with you 100%. I think that more often than not, leadership roles happen by skill in a function, not so much in the skill set required of a good leader. And I agree. I think coaching needs to be one of those strengths.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I think that's a really great point. So maybe let's flip the switch here, flip the coin. A leader is listening right now and they'd have ADHD. And either they know it or they suspect it. What advice would you give that person as they navigate this for themselves as a leader
Yeah,
specifically?
I would well, thing one is give themselves grace. Yeah, give yourself grace. Know yourself and know where your strengths are and know when is a good time of day to tackle certain things and when is a good time of day to say, you know what, that can be shelved until tomorrow because and honestly, that's good sound advice for the neurotypical brain as well. You know, if you know you're a morning person, tackle those big things in the morning when you have all your energy and everything around you, but don't put them off till the after. For me, it's the 2 o'clock in the afternoon. That's my before, and that's kind of the above the fold, below the fold for me is 2 in the afternoon, and anything after 2 o'clock, I'm like
Yeah, you probably do administrative tasks right after too, right?
the other thing too, I think with leaders who have ADHD is let it shine because I think when there's power in vulnerability, right? Brené Brown talks about vulnerability a lot, and but there's strength in that. And especially if you have direct reports, if you have people that are looking to you to model anything, if you happen to have ADHD and you share, this is, this is what's going on with me. This is how I'm working with this so that I can be successful. You're modeling for the people on your team who might have it, may not have disclosed it, or who know someone else. It's a positive reinforcement that it's not it doesn't have to be debilitating, right? It can be a superpower. So you as a leader can rule one is give yourself grace, right? And know that this is what it is and what flavor it comes in for you because people with ADHD all come with different sizes, different varieties, um, but know what your own brand is, your own brand of ADHD is. If it's hyper focus, one of my sons who has ADHD, that's his thing, right? It's hyper focus on things that he likes to do. This is why he would do his homework and never turn it in, and I could not wrap my head around that for the life of me. But he'll sit in front of a video game that he loves for hours, but he don't want to give 10 minutes to a homework assignment or, rinse the dishes off or put them in the dishwasher because those are tasks he doesn't enjoy, right? But for something he does enjoy, he's right there. So, if leaders know that that's their brand, that hyper focus, then they can say, okay, well, I know that this is a tendency for me. So if it's something that really needs a lot of my time and attention, that's when I'm going to apply that hyper focus to this. And then once that task is complete or that project is accomplished, then I can move on to other things and maybe give my brain a break. I think um, we don't practice self care in the corporate world like we should. And I think because that term kind of connotates, you're sitting in a corner of the office lighting candles and incense and all this, and that's not really what it is. Although I'm not going to turn down a wine bar in the off.
That's fine, but that's not what we're really talking about. Yeah,
No,
I've
it's
said the
about
same thing
taking
myself.
those 5 to 7 minutes to unplug for a minute, recharge your brain, just your cell phone, if your cell phone battery life is at 2%, you're not gonna be texting anybody. You're not functional. So it's the same thing. We need to occasionally unplug, plug ourselves into however we recharge, take a walk around the block, read a, chapter of a book, whatever it is.
So, Amy, I want to kind of double down a couple things that you've said because, I think these are really important. So, the know yourself, I love because, just in my experience with people of ADHD too, is that, and actually, again, a lot of other people, is that, you don't always accept yourself for who you are and think that you should there's all the shoulds, woulds, and coulds that you put on yourself, right? I should do this, and I should be doing this, or I could be doing that. And it's like, there's an element of both knowing yourself and accepting yourself to say, this is just who I am, and this is how I function, and this is how it is. And I think that's really important to embrace. And then only until you can do that, is this whole idea of power and vulnerability. And I think that the way you described it too, because I think the vulnerability isn't, "Oh, I have ADHD." It's not that. It's actually like, "I have ADHD, and what that means for me is X," which means, like, this is how I show up. Here are my strengths. Here are the things that I need to be able to do good work,
To be successful.
to be successful.
It's not a crutch, it's not an excuse for bad behavior, right? We can't go out there and say, "Oh, well, you know me, I have ADHD, so I can't insert whatever here." That no, right?
Yes, exactly. So I think that I love that, and then this whole idea of self-care. I mean, you mentioned the corporate world not being very good about it, but I don't think any of us, like, are really good at that, and I think you're right. Again, my experience with ADHD, it's actually I think it seems more difficult for people who have ADHD to do self-care. Is that true?
Yes, absolutely, because there's a guilt complex that comes with it. They feel that I shouldn't say they. I think that there's a lot of people that fall into this category for whatever shortcomings that they perceive that they bring to the table. And unfortunately, some people feel that ADHD is a shortcoming if they have it. They feel like they have to overcompensate, right? So they'll do extra work, they'll commit to extra hours, they'll take on more than they can honestly accomplish, and that in and of itself is overwhelming for everybody, right? Um, so the idea to step back and say, it's okay to pass on this opportunity. It's okay to say, I don't have the bandwidth right now to do this well, right? Um, it's all right to do those things. So yes, absolutely. When we talk about practicing self care, it's the knowing what's on your plate, what you're capable of handling, and really having good conversations and with those leaders that are trying to encourage you to do more. Now there's a difference between a stretch goal. We hear all about those. Well, challenge yourself a little bit, push it. Uh, what leaders should really acknowledge is that people that are neurodivergent generally are already challenging themselves. The work is challenging enough. The work environment adds another layer of challenge, and then they themselves have intrinsic challenges because they feel like they're overcompensating for something. So they tend to take on more work than the neurotypical brain employee probably will. And then they burn out faster.
Funny you say that because I was literally just about to mention that. Yeah, and I was curious if you find that to be true, if you've got I don't know if you have any, statistics or articles or evidence, but, like, it does seem like burnout would be more common for people who have ADHD.
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. Because it's the stepping back and realizing I don't have to do all of the things. I don't have to volunteer to do all of the things, right? And nobody's going to think any less of you if you step away from one volunteer project or one team contribution. It's all right.
Yeah, the other thing that I think about when I think about people with ADHD and burnout is that there's just a lot already and again, it depends on the person, but some people there's a lot already happening in their head. You know what I mean? Like there's just like a lot of voices, a lot of, talking going on, and again, everyone has that, but I think people have ADHD, some people have ADHD that's even amplified. So without all the other things that they're doing or all the other, tasks or like you said, wanting to do more or wanting or feeling that guilt of like needing to do more, there's also that.
Yeah. Well, and they I think sometimes some people with ADHD, I watched a colleague for a couple of years do this, my last corporate role. Um, there are tools that someone with ADHD can leverage to help them kind of organize all that chaos in their head in some cases. You know, keep a notebook with you everywhere. And not I'm not talking about taking notes on your laptop or your tablet or your phone. No, actually write it out, and because you're without getting too technical here, the brain, if you write things out by hand, it stores the information, it kind of translates into a different part of your brain than it does to type things on a tablet. You actually retain information longer when you write things out. There have been studies that have done, I can go try to dig up the the universities that have done this, but they have tested university students on exam scores and compared, groups of students who took notes out, wrote them out by hand versus students who just took them, on a laptop or a tablet, and out the students who wrote out their notes outpaced the ones who typed them out on because the information stays in your brain longer. There's connecting that physical act. It takes more effort to write things.
I mean, that's true for me.
It's true for all of us. So I coach ADHD clients to keep a notebook with you, jot down things that you know you're going to forget in the next hour, right? And not in complete sentences. You don't need to keep on, somebody else gave me the advice a long time ago. Oh, keep a journal. I can't keep a journal because I feel obligated to write complete sentences, do all. No, it just keep a notebook with you so that you can just have things to jog your memory. I do that for interviews too. I recommend for folks who have ADHD going through the interview process, number one, create a short bullet list of accomplishments, not complete sentences, just what did you do? Boom, 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 boom. And then practice in like 15 to 20-minute bursts, just talking about those accomplishments so that when you're asked about them, you can speak to them without going on a 20-minute diatribe on any one thing.
Yeah, right. No. Yeah, and so maybe we should go back to that because that kind of keeps coming up is the interview process, which I think is appropriate, especially now. Um, the job market's tight. There's a lot of people in the job market, ADHD or not. But what are the special sort of things that people who have ADHD might want to think about or look out for, or whatever? What should they be thinking about when they're interviewing?
I think well, there's a couple of considerations. One of the things that they can I mean, we talk about reasonable accommodations, that's actually an ADA thing. We have that protection. So they can ask for things like, "Can I get the interview questions in writing ahead of the interview? Is that possible?" That actually helps a lot of people, not just our ADHD brothers and sisters, but they can, and if they feel comfortable to disclose, to say, "Hey, I might need a few extra moments to," so if they're given a 30-minute interview block, maybe they can ask for 45 and say, "I need a few extra moments to be able to discuss these things," and then stay within their 45 minutes, right? Um, if they've got multiple interviews, there's a lot of tech companies in my area that will do panel interviews all day long. I mean, it's daunting. I can't imagine going through that, but they can ask for breaks in between those if that's the situation that they're facing. But you know, I would say build in processing time, right? It's okay to pause in a moment in the middle of an interview to just say, okay, let me think about that for a moment, things like that, so that they can know they can kind of address the question without just flying something off the top of their head that doesn't make any
Yeah,
sense.
like giving themselves permission to just stop and think, or maybe write down some notes as the person's talking. So,
Yeah, well, yeah, and keep those notes with you to keep notes about your own talking points. Put them on sticky notes, put them on whatever, and take those with you. Nobody expects you to go to interview with nothing in your hands, right? So keep those with you. I would say reframe attention as a strength, right? So thinking about, what can we highlight about that? We can highlight curiosity, right? We can highlight the energy level, the ability to kind of handle fast-paced environments. A lot of companies are talking about, "We have a fast-paced environment," which that's one of those pat phrases that I think, "Okay, what does that mean? Does that mean nobody knows what they're doing? It's just complete chaos?" But that's something that the ADHD brain does thrive in a fast-paced environment because they can move from one thing to the next pretty quickly, right? So I think, again, focus on those strengths, not just, "I can't do this," or "I struggle with it." Don't ever lead with those, right? No.
well, and like you said, I mean, you could say those things because what you're just saying is these are strengths that I have. You don't even have to mention ADHD. Like, you're not talking about, oh, I have ADHD and therefore you're going to say all this stuff. You're just saying, because what you're saying, which is true for anyone who goes to an interview, it's like you really have to have the right mindset going into an interview. And so get in the right mindset in terms of thinking about what strengths are you bringing, even if you feel like or you do have some areas of development or you're not as strong or whatever. How do you then flip that on its head and then come to those interviews really talking about your strengths?
Yes, exactly. So you definitely don't lead with those, but you do want to acknowledge. I mean, and that to your point, it's good advice for everybody, not just someone with the neurodivergent brain, right? To address this and think about it from a standpoint of like the STAR framework. What was the situation? What was the task? What was your action? And what was the result? Right. So even from those things that were learning moments, right? I call them learning moments, right? Rather than people's drawbacks, but learning moments. Everything's a learning moment. It's how I learn is by failure, right? And fail spectacularly. So okay, well, that doesn't work, right? But but talk about those learning moments in that frame is like, this is what I've learned from to do this. And the next time this kind of situation comes up, here's what I will do differently, or here's how I have handled this differently. So that people know. I think hiring managers are more keen on, okay, how did you learn from your mistakes and how, but did you beat yourself up over it? And unfortunately a lot of people in the neurodivergent community will beat themselves up when something doesn't go very well. And the sad thing is that's usually a product of corporate culture not really embracing failure as the teaching tool that it should be.
Or just culture, right? Just generally, right? I was just coaching someone yesterday, literally, and I don't think she has ADHD, but she was, going on and on about. I mean, not in a bad way, but just kind of listing all the things that had gone wrong recently, and in fact, much of that had happened that day, and she was dealing with it really well, and it was like a really the way she was talking about it and positioning it. And at the end, I said, "So, what did you learn? What are the lessons learned from all of that?" And she was like, "Really good question."
That's how you know when you've asked a good coaching question. When they have to when they look off to the side, they're thinking, the brain is working. It's like, that was a good question, right? That's
Yeah,
how you
but
know.
it's like you're so consumed with, like, beating yourself up for all the things you did wrong, which is different than taking a step back and saying, "What did I learn?" And really codifying it, and making it so that it's a truly and maybe lessons learned is now overused, but, like, something, you've taken something away that you can use later. That's what it's supposed to be.
We have a phrase we use with instructional designers, and it's a writing. You'll hear editors use this. It's kill your darlings, and it's about you've heard this, and at first you're like, what the heck is that? And it's really about taking those sections of your writing and say and saying, "This is great, but not in this context." So, yeah, take it out of here, don't delete it, don't get rid of it, we might be able to use it somewhere else, but it doesn't belong here kind of thing. And you're right, it's taking that step back and looking at something, retroactively and going, "Oh, yeah." Sometimes it just takes a day. I tell people when you're writing something, write it, edit it, do whatever. If you've got the benefit of having someone else read your work, great. Usually we don't get that, but sleep on it. Look at it tomorrow because I guarantee you're going to find a different way to look at that.
Yeah. What are some misconceptions or myths that people have about ADHD, either as a leader or people on a team, right? Is just part of the workforce.
Yeah, I love that question because I think when someone says that they have ADHD or someone on the team has ADHD, there's almost this inner dialogue that says, "Oh, this person starts a million projects, finishes none." Right? There's this perception that they're flaky, they don't get anything, they go from one thing to the next, which the ability to go from one thing to the next is sadly, it's something that a lot of companies advertise that they want people to be able to do. So if you have someone who has that ability, why aren't you tapping into that, right? But having that negative connotation that they don't finish anything, that's a myth. It's really, I think it goes back to those coaching questions and really sitting down. So, how can I support you? What is it that you need? What are the roadblocks here? If it is something that they need to accomplish, right? In a certain time frame, maybe it's time frame. A lot of times, people with ADHD thrive if they're given, a timeline, right? And a little bit of an agenda. Now, maybe not a rigid one, right? The more rigid, the less it's going to be effective. But if you give them kind of an overview of what here's the situation, here's what we see happening, and here's the deadline, here's when we need it to happen, and then turn them loose, they'll get creative with it and they'll accomplish it. But I think all those negative connotations, oh, this person is flaky, they start 100 things, they don't finish any of them. Um, I think that's a big myth. Now, can it be a self-fulfilling prophecy? Yes, but I think that goes back to knowing yourself and knowing when to, leverage your strengths and when to not, you know, hand it in as a chip for bad behavior, poor performance.
Sure, sure. I guess question might be too close, but I think it's different enough that I'd like to hear the answer. Is for someone listening right now too, like what do you wish more people who are listening right now understood about
Oh, I
ADHD?
love that I think that they probably would wish that people understood that they're not broken, right? Their brain just works on a different operating system. That's all it is. I think that, and then make an effort to understand that operating system, not just knowing that it's there, but how does it work? You don't need to be fluent in it. You just need to have some basic understanding and the ability to be curious and ask questions. I promise you, people who have shared with you that they're ADHD, they will tell you what they need. They're saying that because they want you to understand where their pain points are and what they need in order to be successful because they're trying to do exactly that. They're trying to be successful. So I think that that's the biggest thing that they would want you to know is that there's nothing wrong with them. They're not something to be avoided or something to be fixed, right? It's an operating system. It's a different operating system.
Do you have books, tools, practices that you would recommend? In fact, you know what? I would love a list and I'll put in the show notes. But is there one or two that stands out? You know what I mean? One or two that like kind of either immediately come to mind or you feel like, if you were to read one thing, I don't know. Do you have like maybe in addition to the list you can send me?
As far as books, I'm really terrible at book titles right off the top of my head. I would say there's a couple of people that I would follow on social media just or keep track of their blog. Richard Branson, Sir Richard Branson. He is very famously, openly ADHD, and he talks about it in interviews all the time. And I think especially for leaders who have ADHD, I think listening to some of the sound bites, and I promise his interviews are short, so there's no hour-long, 60-minute, um, but just listening to him is uplifting enough, right? And it helps you kind of see that ability to look at the bigger picture and to be creative and see. I mean, the man has built, what, 155 businesses from the ground up,
Sheesh.
something
And
like
so
that.
different too, right?
Right, right,
From
and been
media to like
successful.
airplanes to right? Yeah.
Yes, well, and I watched an interview with him describing on a news program how Virgin Airlines was born, and he went to this airplane co I think it was Boeing. He went to Boeing and said, "I need 1 airplane. Let me here's my idea." And they looked at him at first like, "Mm," and they just said, "It's 1 airplane. What the heck? Let's do it." And this was like 30 years ago, and look at what he's done with it. But I would say listen to him a little bit, for even for people in leadership positions that aren't necessarily tied to the learning function, I really would still look at the cast.org website. They have a resource out there, and I can send this link to you as well directly, but they have those universal design for learning, um, principles, and it talks about what goes in because I think when you understand what's going on there, that will help inform leaders how to talk to people and how to so if you think about like in a staff meeting, you can't just sit there and just read off all the notes to everybody. How can I engage people a little bit differently, which nobody likes to sit through an hour-long staff meeting anyway, So, I mean, there's some things that leaders can take away from that. So I think that's a good start. And then, yeah, I'll send you some other.
Yeah, that'd be great. I feel like my one of my biggest takeaways from this conversation is really just thinking about the way in which we can be, compassionate, understanding, and aware of where people are coming from and what they need. And again, not to say that ADHD people, don't need maybe certain things, right? But I guess like what I'm taking away from all of this is that if leaders pay attention in the way that we've been talking about in terms of coaching and knowing yourself, understanding other people, again, what do they need to be able to do good work? This is just good for everybody. You know what I mean? Like in terms of how do you think about that and how, again, because if we're saying like everybody is different in some way, right? I mean, ADHD folks might need some things in particular, right? But other folks need other things too, the other 80%. Being a really good leader that's attentive, right, to some of this, they're just gonna be better leaders.
And it's nothing that Daniel Goleman and Travis Bradberry haven't been telling us for 20 plus years about emotional intelligence, right? So, those 4 pillars: understand yourself, understand how to regulate yourself, which is just because you think it doesn't mean it needs to come out here. understanding how to read the room, right? Recognizing how to empathize, how to connect with people and really get to understand what's going on with them. And then relationship management. How do you work with those people? So once you, yeah, I agree. I think that sadly, and a lot of leadership fallacies are because we put people into leadership roles that have very low emotional intelligence, qualities. And the good news about that is that's coachable. That's something that can be addressed.
And it's a skill that can be learned. I mean, that's what I always love about talking about emotional intelligence, because it's a skill that can be learned. But no, you bring up a really good point, is that we can say actually that emotional intelligence is really the foundation of being able to be a good leader if you have ADHD or if you have people on your team with ADHD. That's the foundation.
Yes, or if they're dyslexic, if they're, if they're on the spectrum, anything. Yeah, right.
Anything. That's right. No, that's a really good, way to kind of to end this. But before we do, I wanna know 2 things from you. One is there anything that we didn't talk about that we should have, or anything else that we should talk about or say? That's one.
The only thing I can think of is for someone who might be listening who has ADHD. I shouldn't say is because we are not a product of our diagnoses, but who has it. Let's say you're going through the interview process and you're like, should I disclose it? Should I not disclose it? Um, Number 1, that is a personal choice, right? To disclose or not to disclose. Some people feel comfortable with it. Some company cultures are where it's not, they don't make it very comfortable. Um, but if you feel like you want to disclose it, I think it's fine to do that. I think you can say something like, "Hey, just so you know, I have ADHD. This means I process of a lot of information quickly sometimes, but I sometimes benefit from a little bit of structure, a little extra structure, right? So or I do best when expectations are clear and direct. And I'm always going to ask for clarification when I need that. There's ways to frame that in a positive way to make it not sound like, oh, I have this. It's not a terminal illness, right? We're not. So I think that, knowing that your choice to disclose is yours. And if you choose to do so, make sure that you frame it in a way that is positive and expresses what you need in order to be successful, not just, you know
And you're not even just talking about the interview process. You're talking about, like, if you got a new job, right? And then you're like, "I just wanna either manage expectations, or I just wanna make sure that I'm successful and that we can have a conversation about how I can be successful here." That's what you're talking about.
Yeah, and that's a great way, you're I love that idea because if you think about people, usually anytime someone comes into a company, they join a team, the first thing that team leader does is let's do a meet and greet with the new person. That might be a great way to introduce that to the whole team. So everybody has the same information, can ask questions, and just lean into the how can I be supportive and how can I shine?
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely, good. Well, and then the last question is, how can people reach out to you, and how can you help them? And, yeah, tell us a little bit about, where we can find you.
Yeah, so the website is shillidayvaughan.com. It is a secure website. We do have an intake form there. We don't share information with anybody, so everybody's emails are secure. But you can go out there and learn a little bit about what it is that I do. Most of my work is with helping learning teams, HR teams, in how to prepare for employees who are neurodivergent or coming through the interview process. I coach instructional design teams, facilitation teams on how to make their learning solutions, their learning environments more neurodivergent friendly, right? So, how to set up, if you're doing a face to face training in a classroom, how to set that up so that it's warm and welcoming to the neurodivergent learner. Because if you've got 50 people in there, there's a good chance, 3 or 4 of them at least are somewhere, in the neurodivergent area. So that's what I do. I also coach teams. I'm Insights certified, so I coach teams through communication skills. So for new teams, or not new teams, but for teams who have maybe just adopted um, a new employee who is ADHD and they're trying to figure out how to communicate together. I do education sessions to help them unlock those communication tools, and that's one of my favorites. I love to do that because then people see like, oh, that's why this happens, kind of thing. So that's a little bit of what I do, but you can go check out the website. It is designed to be accessible and very neurodivergent friendly. If somebody finds it otherwise, please let me know. I'll talk to my web designer immediately and get that fixed.
Okay, good. Yeah, no, we'll put that in the show notes, and make sure that people have access to that. So, well, thank you so much, Amy, for being on the show. This was so informative and really interesting. Some really great insights and great tools.
I'm really glad that you were asking these questions. I think more and more people, especially leaders, should be asking these questions and should be, you know, open to trying new approaches to support their people.
Yeah, and if the statistics are 80-20, it means that there are people, and so why not make the most, it benefits everybody to help. Again, this I always go back to this phrase, like helping everyone do good work, because it's good for everybody, it's good for business.
Yeah, that's exactly it. That's exactly it. Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you, Amy.
Thanks, Winnie.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Transformative Leadership Conversations. Please join me as we explore a new leadership theme every month. If you're ready to take your leadership to the next level or empower your teams for success, I'm here to help. Reach out to me directly at winnie@winifred.org or check out my website at www.winniedasilva.com to learn more about my work in coaching executives, developing critical leadership skills, and working with clients to build effective teams. You can always find me on Substack and LinkedIn. Whether you're engaging with me online, suggesting topics, or joining the conversation here on social media, your voice is a vital part of this podcast because you are always welcome to take a seat at the table where every conversation has the potential for transformative change.